Hello, everyone, and greetings to all of you online as well. My name is James Williams, MrConnectivity, and it's wonderful to be here, the other side, not on the organising team, but on the visiting team, so to speak. So, this morning on the way in on the tube, I was actually reading a blog post, and it was all actually about the ruthless pursuit of vision. And I actually loved those 4 words. Because when we come to RCS or RCS business messaging, can we really say that we collectively as an industry have had a ruthless pursuit of the vision? SMS this December will be 32 years old. So it's not as if we as an industry have not had enough time to come up with and really bring a successor, a richer successor to SMS, to reality. We've had plenty of time. The idea of RCS started in 2007. Now, Google purchased Jibe in September 2015, and a few years ago, I had the pleasure of talking to the co-founder of Jibe, Todd Parker, about his journey with his company. And my takeaway was that simplicity, absolute simplicity, is key. The T word is mentioned throughout the MEF community, and that is, of course, trust. So trust has got to be at the heart of every single interaction. Some of the most trusted brands on the planet are in this room. They're in the shape of mobile operators. And I'm pleased to be joined on this Aegis mobile-sponsored panel by Claudine Bell. Come on down, Claudine. A round of applause. Thank you, Claudine. Claudine is no stranger to the MEF community, works on the partnership management side of messaging and indeed payments. Don't forget the payment side of things as well with O2 here in the UK. And this panel is sponsored by Aegis Mobile. And I'd like to introduce now the CEO of Aegis Mobile, Mr. John Bruner. Thank you very much. I'll sit in the middle. I'll sit in the middle. Malcolm in the middle. Why not?
Okay, why not? In the middle of everything.
It's a well-worn phrase that, yes, people know who you are. They will probably have seen you at many MEF events, but let's not assume anything. John? No? People know Claudine. But we come back to Claudine. Yourself. Could you introduce yourself and what does your company do?
Oh, thank you. Okay. I'm John. Aegis does a lot of different things, actually, believe it or not. We do verification at scale, but we also have a number of other products around compliance. The concept being that just doing vetting doesn't stop fraud, right? The idea of doing vetting is you've got traceback to who's behind the activities of that campaign. So we have other market monitoring products. We have complaint analytics products. We have transaction pattern analytics products. Are all designed to identify fraud as it occurs in the market and then be able to tie it back to a registry and who's actually behind it. So while we're known among all of you in the fraud industry for about 18 years, we've had a dozen other products that are designed to provide compliance and to protect consumers. But the idea is it's a life cycle approach to protecting consumers because, as I said, they're going to get through vetting and registry at times, not always. So you really need to look beyond just having an upfront registry if you want to ensure you're protecting your customers.
The at-scale element is really, really important. Can you give us an idea of how many companies you've vetted? And indeed, I seem to remember
a couple
of years ago you mentioned one specific day where you vetted rather a lot within one day.
Well, so Aegis has been providing vetting services across many channels we've been around since 2006, but we started vetting around 2008. And we started in the premium SMS industry, but then we moved into location services, identity APIs, direct carrier billing, IoT partner programs. And then about 3 years ago, we were asked to come back into the messaging industry within the United States. And we were asked if we could, move to scale. So we took all of our dozen years of vetting experience and turned that into an automated API-based platform that you send brand information in the front door, and we call 80 data sources out the back door live. So we're not storing millions of business records. We are calling it as live as we can get it, reading the 80 data sources, and then producing an analysis of it, and then producing a risk score out the front with some flags that say why the score is what it is. And we do those in anywhere from 3 to 10 seconds per company. Our largest was in November of 2023, where we processed over 46,000 companies in a single day through the platform. And to date, we've done about 3.4 million companies through the automated platform. Yesterday, we did another 5,000 companies. So it's definitely moving along. In that instance, we sit behind my friends at the campaign registry, but we're also now vetting for short codes, and we are currently working with all of the major carriers in the United States to launch their RBM platforms. So we're going to try and automate that, as I said in the last panel.
Now, if that isn't a practical step, I don't know what is to RBM adoption. Now, Claudine, the panel, the title says it all. It's about practical steps towards the adoption of RBM, but also beyond RBM. But let's stick with RCS business messaging. Just talk a little bit about your network's journey with RBM so far, or with.
Sure. So I think most of you in the room who've been to a panel in the last year at MEF that's talked about RCS will be familiar with me, and that I sit on a panel and I talk about our journey from having our own. Sorry, I'm actually not feeling well today, so you have to excuse me slightly. To our journey to where we got to now, where we're all on the Jive platform, to sort of keep it short. We work very collaboratively with the other UK networks, particularly, I think BT are in the room, I think, Vodafone and Three, to really build out the trust element and the process around the verification. I've said multiple times, so I'm actually not even going to apologise for repeating myself. I believe we need to keep friction in the right place in the channel to make sure that we're creating that trusted experience. And that, for me, comes around the verification, around the checks that are in place, and creating a process that's very clear to the partners who are connected to us, but also internally in each individual organisation. I can't talk about the other carriers, but from an O2 perspective, where we're very clear what verification looks like to us and what that process is, and the checks that we're doing.
Fantastic, thank you. I know, so the verification obviously is one important part, certainly with practical adoption as well. Standardisation to a degree is really important. I know all the great work MEF members have done together, particularly in what was known as the RCS commercial models working group, which I had the pleasure of running for a couple of years, and that was fantastic. Being able to come out with some standardised models within a country seems to be really, really an important way to go, as in, for example, Germany seems to be a good example of that.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, I think that is a really good example of how we have worked together. I think when initially we launched commercially in the UK, even the conversation was different depending on the duration of the conversation, was different depending on which network we were on. It doesn't make it easy to go out and talk to a brand and to sort of sell the dream and sell the service when, one network has it at 6 hours, one network has a conversation at 24 hours. So that's something that we have brought into
that's a really important point. Actually, the co-founder of Jive did mention that to me, because the first mobile operator they went to and actually commercially sold a solution to was a mobile operator here in the UK. And that was the problem they came up against, the variety of business models out there. So it's very, very clear, I think it's been done within the MEF community and by so many members here, that we know standardization of business models is really important. And what about practical steps for onboarding the businesses, John? Clearly, the first port of call has to be the brand verification.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because I was sitting with one of the major carriers a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the fact that branded messaging, RBM, we expect brands to want to make modifications to their logos over time. Simple example, it's soccer season. We're going to put a soccer ball on our logo. But so with that in mind, we've got the concept of the background check and behavioral analysis of the brand itself. But when you're looking at the logo or the banner or the complications of a chatbot, what we're designing is the ability to separate the analysis of the components. Because the idea is we don't want to re-vet a brand that wants to update their logo to something slightly different, or maybe it's Nike tennis versus Nike soccer, and it's got slightly different banner or something like that. They shouldn't be recharged every time for the brand verification. It's just adding another asset to their books. So we're developing a process where each component gets a credential. So the brand gets a credential, the banner gets a credential, the logo gets a credential once it's all verified. And then there's an agent level credential created that is used, the way that Google is creating an agent level ID. And so our concept is that if it's, and by the way, in the US market, they're requiring annual renewal of the brand and of its assets. But the idea is if during the year, different components are being swapped out, then we just need to know exactly who to tie it to, and we can verify that component and create a credential for that new added logo, and then create a new agent ID that ties that logo to that brand. And so again, we're trying to make it flexible so that it's not a pain every time there's a change that's going to be made. And so this is our concept of how do we make it easier on the brands while providing enough friction to keep Claudine happy.
Can we just talk about the scale side of things? So a statistic I remember from Nick Lane from several years ago during my time here at MEF was the number of listed businesses around the world, and at that time it was 305 million. It's probably gone up. So over 300 million listed businesses. Another statistic I've heard recently is there are 400 million businesses in the world. That's a lot of businesses. The vast majority are going to be small and medium sized. Now, not all these businesses have the luxury of having a nice marketing and PR team of their own, so many rely on external organizations. What does the brand verification process look like? Let's say if I'm a small business, I've outsourced my PR marketing to Claudine, so I want Claudine to take care of all my business messaging, but Claudine doesn't have a MrConnectivity email address, et cetera, et cetera. How would that work? And because that's part of the scaling, you've got to be able to deal with all these situations.
So you're asking about verifying that a company is who they say they are?
Correct.
Okay, yes. Because one of the things that we're looking at for 160 countries successfully, so in the US market, we have companies from 160 countries that have registered to be a known sender for the 10-digit long code channel. And what we do is we take a tax ID and a legal name from whatever country you're from, and we verify that you're legally registered in that country and that you still exist and you're in good standing. We do that in about 3 seconds, which is great, and we're charging about $3 US to do that. But that doesn't verify that you are who you say you are, because over the last 3 years with Copilot and other ways of advanced search engines, I can now get about 70% of the tax IDs I look for. Whereas honestly, 3 years ago, that was harder. It was only the big Fortune 500s that I could Google a tax ID for. Google's still in the room. We launched in October for both the campaign registry for 10-digit long code as well as short codes, Authentication Plus, wherein we are evaluating both the URL of the company's website, but also the domain within the email address to see how tightly we can tie that information to that company. We're getting an employee name, an employee title, and then the system automatically sends an email with a PIN and a link, and they execute it. They put the link in, we pick up the IP address, we analyze the results that are returned, and we've now directly contacted an employee within the company that is registering. Now, how we brand that interface, is it branded by the centralized registry? Is it branded by the carrier? Is it branded by the direct aggregator? That's all configurable depending on the market. Because quite honestly, nobody knows who the hell Aegis is. So for us to send it out, people are going to say, why am I clicking on this link? But what we have done, at least within the 10DLC, is there's been a notification for the last 6 months. So we are having success with people opening the link, but we're actually going out as the campaign registry with our direct verification. So Again, the idea is to configure to different markets, which is critical. How all this works is configurable. How we analyze information is configurable, because what we've learned is from channel to channel and market to market, requirements are different.
Fantastic. Now, John talked about the commercial model. He talked about the price in the US, and it's important to make everything within reach of smaller and medium-sized organizations. From your perspective, Claudine, when it comes to the brand verification at the moment, a brand might be verified, for example, to send SMS, but John, on an earlier panel sponsored by OpenMind, talked about the fact also that Aegis do branded calling and things like that. How realistic, or from an operator perspective, how desirable is it to have a brand verified once at the highest level, and other than it might be from a regulatory perspective having to do it annually, or as John mentioned, if a logo changes because of a particular sponsorship deal, you have to verify those components. But to do it once and you're done, so whether it's SMS or RBM or anything, that verification is done.
Yeah, certainly sort of speaking from the messaging and payments area, I think that's ideal. If we can take the verification that we do now as standard running for RBM and apply that to a range of numbers that business is using, if they're using long numbers or, an alpha tag for their SMS as well, and just have that in a single place and almost like backfill their services that might already be existing as well as those that are coming on board, then absolutely, that's something that I would love to see us achieve. And it does feel that RBM is bringing that to the fore and bringing that opportunity for us as carriers, because now we are actually verifying, the business, the person that works there, the use case, and if we can just use that to, like I said, almost backfill and filter down whether it's from a payments perspective, obviously not talking about regulatory obligations, but from a payments perspective, from an SMS perspective, from a voice perspective, I think that would be great. I think that would go a long way to consumer protections, but also, brand awareness, brands, just that trust comes back into play, which is
KYB, know your business.
Ultimately. And if you can marry that with the KYC elements that we can bring from a verification point of view for the consumer, if you know the brand, if the consumer can be assured of their brand, and the brands can be assured of who the consumer is, then I think that's a very powerful play.
Fantastic. John, sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say one of the other interesting things so we're doing a beta launch right now with one of the large three U.S. carriers, and one of the things that they're using is the token that we create at the agent level will actually have a payload in it, and in that payload they'll be able to unwrap the logo itself that's been approved, and they're going to basically run that against the carrier Google API. And if everything matches, they're going to auto-approve. So it's going to be interesting because we're also, of course, giving that back to the CPaaS aggregator, so that they have the token. It's partially open encrypted, partially closed encrypted, but it does have a payload. So in theory, the brand could carry that, to other channels because it does have a payload. The only thing that it can't do on its own is verify if it's been revoked. So we have APIs where that can be called to see if for any reason, they've done something wrong, on someone's network and somebody revoked it and then the market decided to pull it back. But other than that, it's an intelligent token that has purpose, if you will, that can be used by the brand. And that's especially interesting in that market because each carrier has potentially slightly different direct connect aggregators hooked up. And so in the past, that can create problems because each of those DCAs has to submit the brand separately to get on all carriers, if you will.
So DCA is an aggregator. It's the direct connect.
It's the direct connect, the big guys,
yeah. Tier 1 aggregators.
Yep.
There seems to be a hierarchy, essentially, in the brand verification. And to me, it seems that RBM verification sits at the top of the tree. Would that be correct in terms of complexity and what you have to go through for that?
So from the messaging industry right now, yes, because it's the highest risk, at least within the telecommunications. In other words, RCS, short codes, toll-free, and 10DLC are the channels. And so yes, RCS, because the carrier is putting a this has been verified on it, then they're at the greatest risk, and the customer is most likely to trust it. So that is the highest. I will say for branded calling, we're actually verifying rights to use phone numbers, which is another step even beyond, because the idea is that phone number, when it originates a call, it's going to go through a clearinghouse, it's going to be verified that it's been vetted and all that, and that it belongs to that brand, and then it'll pick up the logo and terminate on a phone. So in that instance, we're going a step further, which in verifying rights to use phone numbers is not an easy thing, quite frankly, and there's no automated database globally. So that's the highest problem that we've seen so far.
Right, fantastic. So from your perspective, basically, once a brand has been verified at that highest level, they're done. Literally, you can use that and just use that for all the services you have within your organization. Or am I being too simplistic, Claudine? When it comes to payments and things like that?
You should say we hope.
We hope.
I think we've got to be realistic as well. I think it's important that when we don't, from my view, that we don't view verification as it happens the day, 2 days, a day before, a week before the campaign launches, the service launches, and then that's it runs forever. It needs to be re-verified. I think, John, you mentioned that logos change.
Yeah. Well, we're also redoing the brands on an annual basis because they could be sued for infringement for, brand usage, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think there's merit in saying some services in some verticals that perhaps maybe that's financial services, maybe it's health. They need to be re-verified with more frequency than perhaps a small business that might be sending out hairdresser appointments or beautician appointments. And I think that that's also something that we are looking at. What does the cadence need to be? How does that need to work? What's the re-verification like? And I think this is going to be an iterative process for all of us as we move forward. And we've seen a lot more activity, certainly in the UK now. We've seen a lot more agents up there. And we are, we're learning and we're taking the feedback as well. It might not always feel that way for the aggregators that have given us feedback, but we are definitely taking that feedback and, we're discussing it and we're looking at the merits of, how can this work to encourage growth, but to really engender that trust back in the channel? And how can we use that verification and trust to filter it out to calling, to, to SMS, all of it, APIs, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
If we're the gatekeeper for the verification, for want of a better way of putting it, I think it will make it a lot slicker to offer more trusted proof points to the consumer.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because we've also been involved in identity API vetting for about 8 years now for a major carrier in the US. And that's the highest standard vetting we're doing right now, right? Because it's basically consumer information, not direct, PII, but it is consumer information. And we're developing 30-page reports on every software company that's going to be hooking up and using that data. So now that it's going to volumes, though, with Open Gateway and Chimera and all that stuff, we're negotiating what does that look like? Potentially, is it like the RBM, vet? Is that enough? Given the nature of that data that's being accessed. But anyway. I think what's important is what's the level of risk, and we got to meet that, but also make it efficient so that we can, scale the business. Because honestly, most the carriers around the world are doing the largest brands in their country, and you're kind of stuck from a volume perspective because it's being done manually. So, how do we create that ability to protect the carriers, mainly their customers, the consumers? How do we get that to scale for everybody? And so that's our objective.
John, you mentioned that brand verification is being redone every year. Where did that 1 year time frame come from? Is that something that Aegis is proactively doing, saying to the market, or was that a carrier desire? Or
well, it actually started for us in payments channels, right? So premium SMS and direct carrier billing. There's a lot of risk to the telecom companies that we worked for in Canada, Australia, and the US from a regulatory perspective, because this is a financial transaction. And so in that respect, we were re-vetting every company that was selling content on an annual basis. And so that's where that came from as a best practice. And honestly, in the US, when premium SMS was shut down, we were only one of the carriers was vetting every company that was selling content. And the carriers wound up paying refunds and fines of over $300 million for 4 carriers. And the one carrier that we worked for, vetting everybody, but we also were doing transaction analytics and market intercepts and all that. They were 35 million of over 300 million for 4 carriers. So we proved that the life cycle model works. 35 million is still a lot, but it was nothing compared to what the others had to pay. And this was the largest of the 4 carriers at the time.
I think if that's not a great demonstration of how doing it once a year is very, very proactive, then I don't think there's anything else.
Well, and then on identity APIs, we actually have some where if the company's flagged up front as not having a history, it's a newer company, and they want to let them in, we might actually schedule a quarterly review to see what's happening with them. But anyway, like I said, it's really up to our customers, which are the carriers, because our job is to protect their customers. So that's why we want to be configurable.
Fantastic. We're 3 minutes from the close, and I always try and like to stick to time. So if anybody's got any questions, I'm sure John, Claudine would be more than welcome to take your questions. Ellie from XConnect. And if there's anything online, please, Sam, as well.
Hi, great panel. Just a quick question, which is, where do you see the role of regulation and relation to the industry on this fundamental statement of trust?
We've got 2 minutes, 38 seconds.
I'll do what she says.
That's quite a big question for 2 minutes, isn't it? And we are going to be, I think, touching on this in a later panel, so I'm going to sidestep it slightly. I think we are in a good position to get ahead of it. I think that we all need to work together as an not just the carriers, but as an ecosystem to make sure we've got something that works, that is slick, but is also very auditable in the trail that we leave when we're doing all of these verifications. It's great to sit on the stage and say, we're verifying everything, but we need to be able to prove it. So I think we need to get ahead of it to make sure that we can all still work commercially and agilely as we want to do today.
In my experience, it's a matter of the carriers in most countries want self-regulation. And so the question is, can we get there as quickly as possible? And it's usually the most efficient model, but is it? We just got to make sure it's protecting those consumers so that they don't come back, right?
Fantastic. Any other questions? Oh, over there. Thank you very much. Someone could get the microphone to, or I will. You sure? Old habits die hard. There we go. Didn't see you there, Susan. Yeah.
Boris from Vodafone. So there's a lot going on to verify brands as part of the RCS business messaging. One of the biggest blights of SMS affects trust is the use of SIM farms, sending P2P SMS, which for RCS is in fact free in most markets, I think, P2P SMS. What's being done to tackle that as a potential sort of problem?
Okay, so
Can you repeat the question?
yeah, so it's about SIM farms, but Aegis is not a firewall company. So.
Yeah, no, we're not a firewall, but I will tell you that we do, for example, receive swipe right complaint data for a major carrier in the US. It can be 40 million complaint messages in a day. We are reading with machine learning and AI tools, every one of them, and we're identifying those that are harmful. And because we're involved in so many registries and we know the sending short code number or we might know the sending phone number, we can tie it back to who it is. And so that's, we also have honeypot technology, obviously. But all those are the places that we are involved in, identifying and trying to tie back to who do we need to shut down. And the one thing I didn't mention that we were very effective in terms of the settlement in the US that I talked about earlier is that once we do the vetting, when we identify a bad actor, not only can we do relational analytics to see who else they're related to that's registered, which oftentimes we'll see that there's 50 other companies related to this bad company. We can shut them all down, but we can also move all that intelligence into a bad actor database and prevent them from re-registering as another new company. down the road. But I just wanted to get that out.
Fantastic.
It's important. But we're not a firewall company. However, we do feed the firewalls because everything that we get through customer complaint data got through the firewall. And it's not their fault. They have milliseconds to make a decision, right? Whereas we can structure the data and read it in a day and then give them intelligence. And then the other thing we need is we'll see an attack, start and then it stops. And we need to know, did the firewall start blocking it or did the fraudster stop and they're coming back? So creating communications across us and the rest of the players is critical. Am I going too long?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But very good.
I can see him fidgeting.
Yeah, exactly. But very, very, very relevant. And that's it. I'm sure there are other questions, but thank you very much indeed. The summary is, before the pause, the summary is very, very simply, if you are thinking, look, we as a mobile operator carrier have got to do everything manually, we can only vet 20 a day, there are solutions out there that can do this at huge scale for your messaging business, APIs, calling, etc., etc. So thank you very much indeed. That was Aegis' sponsored session. Thanks.